Deep in the frozen mountains of Colorado, single mother Emma stood before the iron gates of Whitmore Manor, a crumbling Victorian mansion she never knew existed. Her family had cast her out when she became pregnant, leaving her with nothing but shame and a baby to raise alone. Now, a lawyer's letter revealed she had inherited this decaying estate from a great-aunt she'd never met. The mansion was buried under decades of snow and silence, its windows dark like hollow eyes. Emma had come seeking shelter, perhaps a roof to sell for survival. But on her first night, as a blizzard sealed them inside, her 7-year-old daughter Lily discovered something impossible in the attic, a massive antique safe built into the wall, and scrawled beside it in chalk, a combination written in a child's trembling hand. Why had her family kept this inheritance secret? What was hidden in the safe that someone would kill to protect? The fluorescent lights of Murphy's Diner buzzed with their usual tired hum as Emma wiped down the counter for what felt like the 1,000th time that shift, her feet aching in the cheap sneakers she couldn't afford to replace, her back protesting every movement after 14 hours of slinging coffee and plates to customers who barely saw her as human. At 28, she looked older, the kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix, the kind that came from raising a 7-year-old daughter alone in a world that had no patience for single mothers who'd made the mistake of loving the wrong man. Her family had made their position clear when she'd told them she was pregnant. Leave and never come back. You've shamed us enough. So she had left, with nothing but a duffel bag and a determination that had been slowly eroding under the weight of rent she could barely make, utilities that kept climbing, and the constant fear that one unexpected expense would send their fragile life tumbling into homelessness. Lily was with Mrs. Chen again tonight, the elderly neighbor who charged almost nothing to watch her but whose health was failing, another thread in Emma's life ready to snap at any moment. She had just pocketed her tips, a pathetic collection of bills and coins that might buy groceries for 3 days if she was careful, when her manager Cal handed her an envelope with a return address from Sterling and Associates, attorneys at law. Her first thought was panic, that she was being sued for some medical bill she couldn't pay, but when she tore it open in the back alley during her break, her hands shaking from exhaustion and fear, she found something impossible, a formal letter informing her that she was the sole beneficiary of the estate of Victoria Whitmore, her great-aunt, a woman whose name she had never heard spoken in her entire life. The letter was brief and professional, explaining that Victoria had died intestate but had left specific instructions in a safety deposit box that her estate should pass to the daughter of Catherine's daughter, which the lawyers had traced through public records to Emma. Enclosed was an old brass key and a set of coordinates to a property in the Colorado Rockies, along with a note that she should contact the office to arrange the transfer of the estate, which consisted primarily of the property itself and its contents. Emma read it 3 times, certain it was a scam, but the letterhead looked legitimate, and when she called the number from her dying cell phone, a receptionist confirmed that yes, Mr. Sterling was expecting her call and could meet her Saturday to discuss the details. She stumbled through the rest of her shift in a daze, her mind spinning with questions about this aunt no one had mentioned, about why her family had kept this secret, about what kind of property awaited in the mountains. When she finally trudged up the 3 flights to her apartment at 2 in the morning, she found another envelope taped to her door, this one from her landlord. Rent was increasing by $400 starting next month, an impossible amount that would consume nearly half her income. Emma slid down against the door, the 2 letters clutched in her hands, one threatening to destroy her and one offering a mysterious salvation, and for the first time in 7 years she let herself cry, not from despair but from the terrifying fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, the universe was offering her a way out of the trap her life had become. The old pickup truck wheezed and rattled as Emma coaxed it up the winding mountain road, their entire life packed into the bed under a tarp that flapped and snapped in the increasingly bitter wind. Everything they owned reduced to a dozen boxes, 3 suitcases, and Lily's collection of stuffed animals that the girl refused to leave behind. They had left Denver before dawn, the city lights fading in the rearview mirror as they climbed into the Rockies, following the GPS coordinates from the lawyer's letter into terrain that grew wilder and more isolated with every mile. Lily sat in the passenger seat, her small frame bundled in a winter coat too thin for the cold that was seeping through the truck's failing heater, her breath forming small clouds as she pressed her face against the window and watched the landscape transform from suburban sprawl to dense pine forests that seemed to swallow the narrow road. "Mama, why didn't Grandma ever tell us about Great-Aunt Victoria?" She asked in that innocent way children have of asking questions that cut straight to the heart of things adults would rather avoid, and Emma felt her hands tighten on the steering wheel, searching for an answer that wouldn't poison her daughter with the bitterness she felt toward the family that had cast them out. "Sometimes families have secrets, sweetheart, things they don't talk about because it hurts too much," Emma said carefully, navigating a hairpin turn as the road narrowed to barely more than a single lane, sheer rock face on one side and a dizzying drop on the other. The road climbed higher, the pines growing thicker and taller, until they formed a cathedral of green that blocked out most of the pale afternoon sun, and Emma noticed the first snowflakes beginning to fall. Fat and lazy at first, then coming faster, sticking to the windshield faster than the worn wipers could clear them. The truck's engine coughed and sputtered on the steep grade, and Emma whispered prayers to a God she wasn't sure she believed in, begging the vehicle to hold together just a little longer. They passed no other cars, no houses, no signs of human habitation at all, just endless forest and the increasingly treacherous road that seemed to be leading them to the edge of the world. After 3 hours of climbing, the GPS announced they were approaching their destination, and the road opened into a small clearing where massive iron gates blocked the way forward. Their black metal twisted into elaborate patterns of vines and thorns, crowned with the letter W worked in ornate scrollwork. Beyond the gates, barely visible through the falling snow and the gathering dusk, Emma saw it. Whitmore Manor, a Gothic monstrosity of gray stone and dark timber that rose from the mountainside like something from a nightmare. Its dozens of windows dark and vacant, its multiple chimneys reaching toward the heavy clouds like accusing fingers, its sheer size speaking of wealth and ambition from another era. The mansion was surrounded by towering pines that seemed to lean in toward it, and the whole scene was being rapidly obscured by the snow that was now falling in earnest, transforming the world into a swirling white void. Lily's eyes went wide with a mixture of wonder and fear, and she whispered, "It looks like a castle from a scary story." And Emma couldn't disagree, her own heart sinking as she stared at the decaying grandeur of the estate. She pulled out the brass key from the lawyer's envelope, got out of the truck into the biting cold, and approached the gates, finding an old lock that the key fit perfectly, the mechanism grinding and protesting after decades of disuse before finally surrendering with a heavy clank that echoed through the forest. And as the gates swung slowly inward with a shriek of rusted hinges, Emma understood she was crossing a threshold from which there would be no easy return. And as she climbed back into the truck and drove through with Lily silent beside her, the snow began to fall harder, already erasing their tire tracks, cutting them off from the world they had left behind. The truck's headlights cut through the thickening snow as Emma drove up the long circular drive to the mansion's entrance, revealing stone walls covered in dead ivy and windows so caked with grime they looked like blind eyes staring down at the approaching intruders. And when she finally parked and stepped out into the biting wind, the sheer scale of Whitmore Manor hit her with physical force. Its 3 stories of Victorian excess looming above them with towers and gables and architectural flourishes that spoke of money spent not for beauty but for dominance. The front door was massive, carved from dark wood and set with iron fixtures that had rusted to a deep orange, and when Emma used the second key from the lawyer's envelope, the lock turned with surprising ease, as if someone had recently oiled it, and the door swung inward with a groan that seemed to come from the house's very bones, releasing a breath of stale air that smelled of dust and decay and something else Emma couldn't quite name, something that made her instinctively pull Lily closer. They stepped into an entrance hall that had once been grand, its floor a checkerboard of black and white marble, now dulled by decades of accumulated grime, its walls rising 2 stories to a ceiling painted with faded frescoes of classical scenes, and a massive crystal chandelier hung above them like a frozen waterfall, half its crystals missing and the rest coated in dust so thick they no longer caught the light. Every piece of furniture was draped in white sheets that had yellowed with age, giving the hall the appearance of a room full of ghosts frozen in mid-conversation, and along the walls hung portraits in heavy gilt frames, dozens of them, stern-faced men and women in Victorian dress who stared down with expressions of judgment and disapproval that made Emma feel like an intruder in a place she supposedly now owned. Lily pressed against her side, unusually quiet, her small hand gripping Emma's coat with white-knuckled intensity as they moved deeper into the house, their footsteps echoing on the marble in a way that made it sound like someone was following them. The great room opened off the main hall, a cavernous space dominated by a fireplace large enough to stand in, its stone hearth blackened by countless fires. And to Emma's relief, she found that the lawyer had kept his word. Stacked beside the hearth was a cord of dry wood, and on a nearby table sat boxes of matches, several lanterns with oil, and even some basic canned goods and bottled water. She quickly set about building a fire, her hands shaking from cold and from something else, some primal unease that had been growing since they'd passed through the gates. And as the flames finally caught and began to push back the darkness, the dancing light revealed more of the room's details, more sheet-covered furniture, more portraits of disapproving ancestors, and built-in bookshelves stretching floor to ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes whose spines were too faded to read. Lily had wandered to one of the windows and was rubbing a circle in the grime, peering out at the snow that was now falling so heavily the truck was already becoming a white mound in the drive. And she said in a small voice, "Mama, I don't like it here. It feels like the house is watching us." And Emma wanted to tell her daughter she was being silly, that houses couldn't watch anyone, but the words died in her throat because she felt it too, that sensation of being observed, of being weighed and measured by some intelligence that permeated the very walls. The portraits seemed to track their movements. The shadows in the corners seemed too deep and too deliberately placed, and twice Emma could have sworn she heard footsteps on the floor above them, though she told herself it was just the old house settling, just the wind and the weight of snow on the ancient timbers. As night fell completely and the storm outside intensified into a howling fury that rattled the windows and sent drafts whistling through invisible cracks, Emma pulled the sheet off a sofa near the fire and made a nest of their sleeping bags, gathering Lily close as they ate cold beans from a can and listened to the house creak and groan around them like a living thing. This was their inheritance, this decaying monument to a family that had rejected them, and as Emma stared into the fire and felt the weight of all those painted eyes upon her back, she wondered what Great-Aunt Victoria had really left them, and whether it was a gift or a curse. Once Lily had fallen into an exhausted sleep curled in her sleeping bag by the fire, Emma took one of the oil lanterns and began a cautious exploration of the ground floor, the fireplace poker gripped tight in her other hand, though she felt foolish carrying it. Like a character in a Gothic novel she'd once read, during the brief year she'd managed to attend community college before Lily was born and survival became her only education. The mansion revealed itself in fragments of lamplight, a dining room with a table that could seat 20 beneath a sheet thick with dust, a library whose leather chairs had cracked and split with age, a kitchen that still had ancient cast-iron pots hanging from hooks, and an enormous wood-burning stove that looked like it hadn't been used since the Great Depression. And everywhere more portraits, more furniture draped like corpses, more evidence of a wealth and grandeur that had simply been abandoned and left to rot. She was examining what appeared to be a butler's pantry when she heard Lily's voice calling from somewhere distant in the house, not frightened but excited. And Emma's heart seized with panic as she rushed back toward the great room, only to find her daughter's sleeping bag empty, the fire burning low, and no sign of where the girl had gone. "Lily," she called out, her voice swallowed by the vast spaces of the house, and then she heard it again, her daughter's voice coming from down a hallway she hadn't yet explored, and she ran toward it, the lamplight swinging wildly and casting monstrous shadows on the walls. She found Lily in what must have once been a child's bedroom, the furniture smaller and painted white, though the paint had yellowed and peeled, and the girl was sitting cross-legged on the floor beside a small wooden music box, its lid open, winding the key on its side with intense concentration. "Lily, you can't wander off like that," I thought, Emma began, but her daughter interrupted. "Mama, listen, isn't it beautiful?" And she released the key, and the music box began to play, its mechanism surprisingly intact after all these years, producing a tinkling lullaby that was indeed beautiful but also deeply unsettling in its minor key, a melody that seemed designed not to comfort but to mourn. The sound filled the small room and seemed to seep into the walls, and Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold, especially when Lily said, "I heard it playing before I found it. That's how I knew where to look." Emma wanted to tell her that was impossible, that music boxes don't play themselves, but she was learning that in this house, the normal rules didn't seem to apply, and she simply picked up the music box, closed its lid to silence the haunting melody, and carried both it and her daughter back to the safety of the fire. The blizzard that had been building all evening now descended with apocalyptic fury, the wind screaming around the mansion's corners and hurling snow against the windows with such force that Emma feared the glass would shatter. and the temperature inside the house dropped so precipitously that even huddled close to the fire they could see their breath, and she fed log after log to the flames, grateful for the lawyer's foresight in leaving them so much wood. It was sometime after midnight when Emma heard them, footsteps, clear and deliberate, coming from the floor directly above their heads, the unmistakable sound of someone walking slowly across a wooden floor, pausing, then continuing, as if searching for something or someone. She sat up, her heart hammering, and reached for the fireplace poker, every sense suddenly alert, listening as the footsteps moved from one end of the ceiling to the other, then stopped directly overhead. Lily was sleeping, and Emma wanted to keep it that way, so she rose quietly, took the lamp, and made her way to the grand staircase that curved up to the second floor, the poker raised like a weapon, her rational mind insisting it was just the house settling, just the storm, just old wood expanding and contracting, while some deeper instinct screamed that she was not alone in this place. The second-floor hallway stretched in both directions, doors lining both sides like a hotel, and her lamp revealed only more dust, more decay, more shadows that seemed to move at the edge of her vision. And though she walked the entire length of the corridor, checking each room with her heart in her throat, she found nothing, no intruder, no explanation for the sounds she'd heard. When she returned to the great room, exhausted and shaking, she tried her cell phone and found it had no signal. Tried the old rotary phone she'd seen in the library and found the line completely dead. And she understood with cold certainty that they were trapped, that the storm had cut them off completely from civilization, that if something happened here, if someone was in the house with them, or if the house itself meant them harm, there would be no rescue, no escape, no one to hear them scream. Morning came reluctantly, the storm still raging outside and transforming the mansion into a dim twilight world where Emma couldn't tell if it was 8 in the morning or noon. The snow piled so high against the ground floor windows that only a few feet of glass remained visible at the top, revealing nothing but a wall of white that pressed against the house like it was trying to bury them alive. She had barely slept, jerking awake at every creak and groan of the old structure, and when she finally gave up on rest and stoked the fire back to life, she found Lily already awake, sitting cross-legged on her sleeping bag and staring at the music box with an intensity that worried Emma more than she wanted to admit. They ate a cold breakfast of canned peaches and stale crackers from the supplies, and Emma decided to make a thorough inventory of the kitchen to see what food resources they actually had, hoping the task would ground her in something practical and normal after the unsettling night. She left Lily in the great room with strict instructions not to wander off, gave her some paper and colored pencils she'd packed, and headed toward the kitchen with her notepad, determined to create some order in this chaos. The kitchen was vast and antiquated, with a massive pantry that still held rows of ancient canned goods, their labels faded and unreadable, alongside the fresh supplies the lawyer had left. And Emma was meticulously cataloging everything when she realized she could no longer hear the scratching of Lily's pencils on paper, could no longer hear her daughter humming the way she always did when she drew. And a cold dread seized her chest as she dropped the notepad and ran back toward the great room. Lily's sleeping bag was empty, the colored pencils scattered across the floor, and Emma's scream of her daughter's name echoed through the mansion, bouncing off the high ceilings and coming back to her like a mocking chorus. She ran through the ground floor, checking every room they'd explored, her panic rising with each empty space, and then she heard it, Lily's voice, faint and distant, calling, "Mama. Come see," from somewhere above, and Emma took the stairs 2 at a time, the fireplace poker once again in her hand, her mind spinning with terrible possibilities. She found her daughter on the second-floor landing, standing perfectly still before a section of wall that Emma could have sworn was just blank paneling yesterday. But now she could see that a heavy tapestry hung there, its fabric so dark and covered in dust that it had blended completely with the shadows, depicting a hunting scene with dogs and horses pursuing some unseen prey through a dark forest. Lily had pulled back one edge of the tapestry, revealing a narrow door set flush with the wall, painted the same dark wood as the paneling, nearly invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. And the door stood slightly ajar, revealing a darkness beyond that seemed to swallow the weak morning light. "Lily, step away from there right now," Emma commanded, but her daughter turned to her with an expression that was both excited and troubled, her small face pale in the gloom. "Mama, someone was calling my name." I heard it clear as anything, a lady's voice saying, "Lily, come find me, Lily." "And it came from up there," she said, pointing to the darkness beyond the door. And Emma felt her skin prickle with goosebumps because she knew her daughter wasn't lying, knew that in this house the impossible seemed to be the norm. Emma approached the door and pulled it fully open, revealing a narrow wooden staircase that climbed steeply upward, the steps worn smooth in the center, from countless feet over countless years, disappearing into a darkness so complete that her eyes couldn't penetrate it, and a draft of cold air flowed down from above, carrying with it the smell of old wood and something else, something like lavender and dust, and secrets kept too long. Every rational instinct screamed at Emma to close the door, to take Lily and barricade themselves in the great room and wait for the storm to pass. But she thought of the lawyer's letter, of Great-Aunt Victoria who had left this place to her specifically, of the family that had cast her out and never mentioned this woman's name, and she understood that whatever waited in the attic was the reason she was here, the reason Victoria had reached across death to bring her to this place. "Stay behind me, and stay close," Emma said, taking Lily's hand in hers and gripping the poker tighter in the other, and together they began to climb the narrow stairs, each step creaking under their weight, the darkness above them seeming to press down with a weight that was almost physical. And as they ascended, Emma had the strangest sensation that they weren't climbing toward something, but that something was pulling them upward, drawing them into the heart of Whitmore Manor's deepest secret. And with each step she felt more certain that after this moment, after they reached whatever waited in the attic, nothing in their lives would ever be the same again. The attic stretched before them like the nave of a cathedral, its peaked ceiling rising 30 feet overhead and supported by massive timber beams darkened with age. The vast space lit only by the weak gray light filtering through small dormer windows on either end, their glass so thick with grime that the raging storm outside appeared as nothing more than ghostly shifting shadows. The air was thick with dust that swirled in Emma's flashlight beam as she swept it across the space, revealing a landscape of the past. Steamer trunks stacked 3 and 4 high, their leather straps cracked and rotting, furniture from different eras piled haphazardly as if someone had simply emptied room after room up here over decades. Dress forms wearing tattered gowns that hung like the shed skins of ghosts, rolled carpets standing in corners like silent sentinels, boxes and crates marked with faded shipping labels from cities Emma had never heard of. And everywhere the accumulated debris of a wealthy family's history, generations of Whitmores consigning their used and unwanted possessions to this forgotten realm above the world. Lily's hand tightened in Emma's as they moved deeper into the attic, their footsteps muffled by a thick layer of dust that rose with each step, and Emma could feel her daughter trembling, though whether from cold or fear she couldn't tell, possibly both as the temperature up here was even more frigid than the floors below, their breath forming clouds that hung in the still air like small spirits. They navigated between the towers of trunks and furniture, Emma's flashlight the only source of real illumination, creating a small bubble of light in an ocean of shadow. And she was beginning to wonder what exactly they were supposed to find up here, when Lily suddenly stopped and pointed toward the far corner of the attic, toward a section of wall that looked different from the others, and whispered, "There, Mama, that's where the voice came from." Emma turned her flashlight toward the corner and saw what Lily meant. Behind a particularly large stack of ornate steamer trunks, barely visible in the shadows, was what appeared to be a door. But not a wooden door like the rest of the house. This one was steel, heavy, and industrial. Its surface painted a dull gray that had bubbled and peeled with age, completely out of place in the Victorian architecture of the mansion. Emma approached it cautiously, setting down the poker to use both hands to shift the heavy trunks aside, each one requiring all her strength to move even a few inches, and Lily tried to help, though her small hands could barely grip the leather handles. But together they managed to clear a path to the steel door, and Emma saw that it wasn't locked. The handle turned easily, and when she pulled it open, it swung smoothly on well-oiled hinges that suggested someone had maintained it far more recently than anything else in this abandoned house. Beyond the door was a small room, perhaps 10 feet square, its walls and ceiling lined with what looked like lead sheeting, and set into the back wall was a safe, not a modern safe but a magnificent antique, easily 6 feet tall and 4 feet wide, its surface covered in ornate brass fittings and decorative flourishes, the dial at its center gleaming even in the dim light as if it had been recently polished, the whole thing radiating an aura of importance and secrecy that made Emma's breath catch in her throat. She stepped into the small room, Lily pressed against her side, and played her flashlight across the safe's surface, reading the manufacturer's name embossed in brass. Whitmore & Sons, Custom Vault, Philadelphia 1923. And she realized this safe had been built specifically for this family, custom made to their specifications, and whatever was inside had been important enough to warrant this extraordinary security. It was Lily who noticed the numbers, her young eyes closer to the floor and sharper than Emma's, and she tugged on her mother's coat and pointed downward. And Emma angled her flashlight to see what her daughter had found. There, on the dusty floor, directly in front of the safe, written in white chalk in the careful, shaky handwriting of a child, were 6 numbers. 061424. The chalk lines still relatively crisp and clear, as if they'd been written in the protected environment of this lead-lined room where even air and moisture moved slowly. Emma stared at the numbers, her mind racing, because this couldn't be coincidence, couldn't be anything but the combination to the safe, left here deliberately by someone. And she thought of Lily hearing a voice calling her name, thought of the music box playing itself, thought of Great-Aunt Victoria who had vanished 50 years ago. And she understood with sudden clarity that they were being guided, that Victoria had left a trail for someone to follow, a treasure hunt designed for a specific person at a specific time. Lily reached toward the safe's dial, her small fingers stretching toward the gleaming brass, and Emma caught her hand just in time, pulling her back with a force that made the girl gasp in surprise. "Don't touch it," Emma said, her voice sharper than she intended, because every instinct honed by years of survival in a world that took advantage of desperate people was screaming at her that this was too easy, too convenient. That safes protecting valuable things weren't left with their combinations written on the floor like an invitation. And she thought of the lawyer's strange tone when he'd called this estate an inheritance, thought of the family that had never mentioned Victoria's name, thought of this mansion sitting abandoned for half a century while someone clearly maintained at least this one mechanism. And she knew with cold certainty that opening this safe would set something in motion that she couldn't stop, would draw attention from people who had spent decades keeping whatever was inside hidden, and that the moment she turned that dial, their lives would be in danger. Emma stood frozen in front of the safe for a long moment, her mind racing through possibilities and consequences, before she finally made a decision. They needed information before they acted, needed to understand what they were dealing with, and the only person who might have answers was Harold Sterling, the lawyer who had sent her here in the first place. She grabbed Lily's hand, and they navigated back through the maze of the attic, down the narrow staircase, and Emma made straight for the library where she'd seen the old rotary phone the night before, praying that the storm hadn't yet knocked out the phone lines completely. The phone sat on a massive oak desk that dominated one corner of the library, its black bakelite surface coated in dust, and when Emma lifted the receiver to her ear, she nearly sobbed with relief at the sound of a dial tone, faint and crackling with static but present, a connection to the outside world that felt like a lifeline. She pulled Sterling's business card from her pocket, her fingers clumsy with cold and urgency, and carefully dialed the number, listening to the phone ring once, twice, 3 times. And she was preparing herself for voicemail when a man's voice answered, professional and cautious. "Sterling and Associates, Harold Sterling speaking." "Mr. Sterling, this is Emma Marsh. We spoke about the Whitmore estate," Emma said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the panic fluttering in her chest. "I'm at the mansion now, and I need to ask you some questions about Victoria Whitmore and about what exactly you knew when you sent me up here." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a hesitation that lasted just a fraction too long, and when Sterling spoke again, his voice had changed. The professional polish replaced by something that sounded almost like fear. "Miss Marsh, where exactly are you right now? Are you inside the mansion?" "Yes, we arrived yesterday. We're snowed in by the storm," Emma said. "Mr. Sterling, there's a safe in the attic, a massive antique safe with the Whitmore name on it. And I need to know what you know about it and about what happened to Victoria." The pause this time was even longer, and Emma could hear Sterling breathing on the other end, could almost feel him choosing his words carefully. "Miss Marsh, I don't know anything about a safe. The estate inventory never mentioned anything like that, but I need to tell you something that I perhaps should have mentioned before you went up there. Information that has been sealed in my firm's files for 50 years at the request of the Whitmore Family Trust." He took a deep breath, and Emma could hear papers rustling in the background. Victoria Whitmore didn't just die. She disappeared in December of 1974, vanished without a trace from that mansion during a winter storm much like the one you're experiencing now. And there were questions, serious questions that were never adequately answered, about whether her disappearance was voluntary or something far more sinister. Emma felt the floor seem to tilt beneath her, and she sat down hard in the desk chair, the old leather creaking under her weight. What kind of questions? Victoria was married to Thomas Whitmore, who made his fortune in mining and mineral rights, an extremely wealthy and by all accounts extremely ruthless man. Sterling continued, his voice dropping lower as if he feared being overheard. In the months before her disappearance, Victoria had become withdrawn, paranoid according to some accounts, and she had apparently told several people that she had discovered something about her husband's business dealings, something criminal, and that she feared for her life. She even contacted a lawyer about divorce proceedings, but before anything could be filed, she vanished. Her car was still at the mansion, her clothes were still in her closets. There was no sign of foul play, but also no indication she'd left voluntarily, and Thomas claimed she'd simply run off, abandoned him and their young daughter, and because of his wealth and influence. That's the story that became official. Emma's throat went dry, and she glanced at Lily, who was examining books on a nearby shelf, far enough away that she couldn't hear the conversation. "Mr. Sterling, why are you telling me this now, and why did you send me to this place if you knew this history?" "Because legally the estate had to be settled. 50 years have passed and Victoria was declared dead in absentia, and you are her only living heir through your grandmother Catherine, Victoria's daughter," Sterling said, and now his voice carried an edge of urgency that made Emma's pulse quicken. "But Miss Marsh, you need to understand something crucial. The Whitmore family has spent 5 decades trying to get their hands on that property. They've filed countless motions, challenged the inheritance laws, hired investigators, and they've been blocked at every turn by legal technicalities and by instructions Victoria left in a sealed letter with my predecessor. Instructions that the estate must pass only to a female descendant, and only after 50 years had elapsed. She was very specific, almost as if she knew something would happen to her, and she was planning for it." The static on the line was getting worse, the storm clearly affecting the phone system, and Emma had to press the receiver hard against her ear to hear Sterling's next words. "If there's a safe up there, if Victoria hid something that the family has been searching for all these years, then you are in serious danger. These are not people who will let an outsider walk away with whatever secrets that safe contains. You need to leave that mansion immediately. Take your daughter and get out before." The line went dead with a sharp click that had nothing to do with the storm, and Emma stared at the receiver in her hand. The dial tone gone, replaced by absolute silence, and she understood with terrible clarity that the phone line hadn't just failed. It had been cut, deliberately severed, and that somewhere out there in the blizzard, someone knew they were here, knew what they'd found, and was making sure they couldn't call for help. Emma set the dead phone receiver back in its cradle with trembling hands, her mind racing through the implications of Sterling's revelations and the suddenly severed connection, and she knew they needed answers fast. Needed to understand what Victoria had hidden and why before whoever had cut that phone line decided to make their next move. She gathered Lily close and told her they were going on a treasure hunt through the house, framing it as an adventure rather than the desperate search for information it really was. And together they climbed back to the 2nd floor, Emma's instincts telling her that if Victoria had left clues, they would be in her personal spaces, in the rooms where she'd lived and feared and ultimately vanished. The master bedroom was easy to identify, its double doors twice the size of the others, and when Emma pushed them open, she found herself in a suite that must have once been magnificent. A 4-poster bed draped in rotting velvet, a sitting area with chairs positioned before a fireplace, tall windows that in daylight would have offered views of the mountains, and dominating one wall, an elaborate vanity with a massive oval mirror now so tarnished it reflected nothing but shadows. The room smelled of decay and old perfume, a scent that had somehow survived 50 years sealed in this space, and Emma felt like an intruder, a trespasser in the intimate domain of a ghost. Lily was drawn immediately to the vanity, running her small fingers along its marble top, examining the crystal bottles still arranged there, their contents long evaporated, and Emma joined her, studying the piece of furniture with the eye of someone who'd learned in her own small apartment that expensive furniture often had hidden compartments where people stashed things they didn't want found. The vanity had 3 drawers down each side, and Emma opened them methodically, finding ancient cosmetics, hairpins, a tarnished silver brush and comb set, all the detritus of a woman's daily routine frozen in time, but nothing that seemed significant until she reached the bottom drawer on the right side and found it was shallower than it should be given the exterior dimensions of the piece. She ran her fingers along the inside, feeling for a catch or a seam, and Lily, watching intently, suddenly reached past her and pressed hard on a carved rose in the drawer's back panel, and with a soft click, the false bottom popped up slightly, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. Inside were 3 leather-bound journals, their covers worn soft with handling, and a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon, and Emma lifted them out with a reverence she couldn't explain, feeling the weight of Victoria's secrets in her hands. She carried the journals to the sitting area, brushed the dust from one of the chairs, and sat down with Lily curled against her side as she opened the first journal, dated 1968, and began to read Victoria's story in the woman's own elegant handwriting. The early entries were mundane, the observations of a young bride adjusting to married life, notes about dinner parties, about the challenges of managing household staff, about her husband Thomas's long absences as he traveled to oversee his mining operations, and Victoria's voice in these pages was hopeful, even cheerful, the voice of a woman who believed she'd married well and secured her future. But as Emma turned the pages, moving through months and then years, the tone began to shift, subtle at first and then increasingly obvious, as Victoria wrote of Thomas's temper, of his obsession with expanding his business empire, of strange men who visited at odd hours and left Thomas agitated and secretive, of her growing realization that her husband's mining company was involved in activities that went far beyond legitimate business. By the second journal, dated 1971, Victoria's entries had become darker, more fearful, and she wrote in detail about discovering documents in Thomas's study that suggested his company was selling worthless mining stocks to unsuspecting investors. Thousands of people pouring their life savings into claims that had already been exhausted or that never contained valuable minerals in the first place. A massive fraud that was making Thomas wealthy beyond measure while destroying families across the country. She wrote of confronting him, of his rage, of the way he'd grabbed her wrist so hard it bruised, and told her she would never speak of what she'd found, that she had no idea who she was dealing with or what he was capable of. And for the first time, Victoria mentioned her daughter Catherine, Emma's grandmother, and her fear of what Thomas might do if she tried to leave and take the child with her. The third journal, dated 1973, was the most disturbing, and Emma felt her blood run cold as she read Victoria's increasingly frantic entries about Thomas's references to a final score, a massive acquisition of bearer bonds and diamonds that he was accumulating through his fraud, converting his illegal profits into portable, untraceable wealth that he planned to hide until the statute of limitations ran out, at which point he would be untouchable. Victoria wrote that she'd begun secretly documenting everything, photographing documents when Thomas was away, keeping a record of every fraudulent transaction, every bribed official, every victim of his scheme, and she'd hidden this evidence somewhere Thomas would never think to look, somewhere that would only be found by someone who deserved to find it, by someone innocent. The final entry, dated the 12th of December, 1974, was written in handwriting that was shakier than the rest, as if Victoria had been writing in fear or haste, and Emma read it aloud in a whisper that seemed too loud in the silent bedroom. "He knows, I know. I saw it in his eyes tonight at dinner, the way he watched me, the way he smiled when he said he'd made arrangements for our Catherine to visit his brother for the holidays. He's separating me from my daughter, and I know what that means. I have perhaps 2 days, maybe less. So I've hidden everything where only an innocent can find it, where greed and corruption will never look because those qualities cannot see what matters most. I've left a trail that only someone pure of heart can follow, the treasure hunt I used to play with Catherine when she was small, and if you're reading this, if you've found these journals, then you've already begun to follow the path. Trust the child. Let the child lead you, for they see what we cannot, and whatever you find, use it or burn it, but don't let them have it. Don't let Thomas's evil endure beyond his grave. He thinks he's won, but I've made sure that someday, somehow, the truth will come to light." Emma closed the journal with shaking hands, and Lily looked up at her with wide eyes and asked, "Mama, what does it mean, trust the child?" And Emma pulled her daughter close, her mind spinning because she understood now that Victoria hadn't just left an inheritance, she'd left a mission, a sacred trust passed down through generations to the one person who would need it most. And the numbers written in chalk on the attic floor weren't left by Victoria. They were left by Catherine, Victoria's daughter, Emma's grandmother, who must have been the one Victoria trusted with the combination before she disappeared, the child who'd written it down in the only place she knew to look, the attic where she and her mother had played their treasure hunt games, and Catherine had kept the secret her whole life, even from her own family, waiting for the right person to inherit what her mother had died protecting. Emma and Lily were still sitting in Victoria's bedroom, the journals spread across Emma's lap, when the sound came, a heavy, deliberate pounding on the mansion's front door that echoed through the empty halls like thunder, so loud it seemed designed not just to gain attention but to intimidate. Emma's first instinct was to freeze, to remain silent and hope whoever it was would go away. But the pounding came again, harder this time, and a man's voice boomed through the thick wood. "Emma Marsh, I know you're in there. Open this door immediately. We need to talk about your illegal occupation of this property." Emma grabbed Lily's hand and pulled her daughter behind her as they moved quietly to the top of the stairs, looking down at the entrance hall where the massive front door shuddered with each impact, and she knew this was the consequence Sterling had tried to warn her about. "Miss Marsh, my name is Marcus Whitmore. I'm the executor of the Whitmore Family Trust. This inheritance claim is invalid. This estate belongs to the Whitmore family and you are trespassing." The voice was cultured, the tone of a man accustomed to being obeyed, but underneath Emma could hear barely contained anger. She descended the stairs slowly. Lily pressed against her side and stopped several feet back from the door. "Mr. Whitmore, I have documentation from Harold Sterling confirming that I am the legal heir. If you have concerns, take them up with the probate court, but I'm not opening this door." The pounding stopped, and for a moment there was only the howl of the wind outside. Then Marcus's voice came again, lower now, more menacing. "You don't understand what you've walked into. There are family matters here that go back decades. If you're smart, you'll leave before this becomes unpleasant." Emma moved to one of the narrow windows flanking the door, carefully pulled back the curtain just enough to peer outside, and what she saw made her stomach clench. Marcus Whitmore stood on the porch, a tall man in his 50s wearing an expensive winter coat, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the wind, and behind him, waiting beside a massive black SUV, were two other men, younger and harder looking, dressed in tactical winter gear, clearly hired muscle. Marcus saw her at the window and smiled, a predator's smile. "I'm not opening this door, and I'm not leaving this property," Emma called out. There was a long pause, then Marcus's voice came one last time, all pretense of civility gone. "Have it your way. We'll be right outside, waiting. Sooner or later, you'll have to come out for food or water or heat, and when you do, we'll be here. Or perhaps we'll simply wait until you fall asleep. These old houses have so many ways in. You might wake up to find us standing over your bed, or standing over your daughter's bed." The threat hung in the air, no longer veiled, and Emma slammed the window shut and stepped back, her whole body shaking. She watched through the window as Marcus turned and walked back to the SUV, climbing into the passenger seat, and the vehicle moved slightly, repositioning to face the house directly. And then the engine turned off and she could see shapes moving inside, settling in, making themselves comfortable. They weren't leaving, they were laying siege to the mansion, cutting off any hope of escape, waiting for exhaustion or desperation to force her hand. And as she turned away from the window and looked down at Lily's frightened face, she knew that the only way out of this was through it, that she had to open that safe and find out what Victoria had died protecting. The night dragged on with agonizing slowness. Emma and Lily barricaded in the great room with furniture pushed against the doors, the fire burning bright not just for warmth, but as a psychological barrier against the men waiting outside. Emma tried to get Lily to sleep, but every time the girl's eyes would start to close, a gust of wind would rattle the windows, and she'd jerk awake with a small gasp of fear. Around midnight, when Lily finally succumbed to exhaustion, Emma sat watching the shadows, and found her thoughts returning obsessively to the attic, to the safe, to the numbers written in chalk. And she realized that sitting here waiting was the worst possible strategy, that the only way to protect Lily was to understand what Victoria had hidden. She carefully extracted herself from beside her daughter, built up the fire, and took the oil lamp and the fireplace poker. climbing once more through the silent house to Victoria's bedroom to study the portrait above the fireplace, a young woman with dark hair and painted at the bottom. Victoria Catherine Whitmore. The 14th of June, 1924. Emma committed the date to memory and continued up to the attic. The safe waited where they'd left it, massive and imposing, and Emma knelt before it, studying the numbers written in chalk, 061424, 6 digits that seemed simple but held the key to everything. She was about to try the combination when she heard the softest sound behind her, and she spun around to find Lily standing at the top of the stairs in her pajamas, her small face pale in the lamplight. "Mama, you're doing it wrong," Lily said softly, walking toward her with strange confidence. "It's not just a date. Look at the numbers. Really look at them. There's spaces in the chalk. See? Really small spaces. It's 0 to 6, then 1 to 4, then 2 to 4. It's telling you how to turn the dial, like a pattern." Emma looked closer and saw what Lily meant. There were indeed tiny gaps in the chalk that divided the 6 digits into 3 pairs, and she realized safe combinations weren't just numbers, they were sequences with direction. "How did you know that?" Emma whispered, but Lily just smiled and said, "The lady told me. She showed me in a dream how the numbers work." Emma felt chills run down her spine. But she turned back to the safe and began again, following the pattern. Turn right to 06, then left past 0 to 14, then right again to 24, feeling the mechanism respond, feeling definite clicks as the internal tumblers fell into place. And when she completed the sequence, she heard a deep, satisfying clunk, the sound of heavy bolts retracting. Emma wrapped both hands around the safe's handle and turned it, and with a final push, the heavy door swung open on surprisingly smooth hinges, releasing a breath of air that had been sealed inside for 50 years. Emma raised her lamp and peered inside, and what she saw made her breath catch. The safe was full, packed with neat stacks of documents and small canvas bags and boxes, and she understood with terrible clarity that she was looking at enough ammunition to destroy the Whitmore family completely, and enough money to save her and Lily forever, and that having opened this door she had crossed a line from which there could be no retreat. Emma's hands trembled as she reached into the safe, pulling out the first bundle, papers bound with a rubber band that crumbled to dust, and when she unfolded them she found bearer bonds, dozens of them, printed on heavy paper with elaborate engravings, issued by the United States Treasury in denominations of $10,000 and $20,000, all dated between 1968 and 1973. She set them aside and reached deeper, pulling out more bundles, gold certificates and stock certificates for mining companies, many with notations in Victoria's handwriting. No gold. Exhausted 1,965. Never had silver. Fraud from start. Sold to 847 investors. Total loss $2.3 million. Mixed among the papers were small canvas bags. And when Emma opened one and poured its contents into her palm, she nearly dropped the lamp because what tumbled out were diamonds, rough, uncut diamonds of various sizes, and she counted 12 bags in total, each heavy with stones that caught the lamplight. Lily pressed close, staring with wide eyes, whispering, "Mama, are we rich now?" And Emma wanted to say yes, but she knew this wealth was poisoned, the accumulated profits of Thomas Whitmore's crimes. But it was the thick folder at the back that made Emma's blood run cold, a leather portfolio embossed with Victoria's initials containing meticulous documentation of a massive criminal enterprise. Photocopies of internal memos from Whitmore Mining discussing how to sell stock in worthless properties, correspondence instructing brokers to target unsophisticated investors, spreadsheets tracking which claims had been salted with gold dust to pass inspections, and most damningly, a ledger in Thomas's handwriting listing payments to mining inspectors, county officials, and federal regulators, bribes totaling millions. Victoria had been thorough, obsessively so, organizing evidence that proved conspiracy at the highest levels. There were contracts with organized crime figures, agreements to launder money through Whitmore's operations, and photographs showing Thomas meeting with these men, grainy but clear enough to identify faces. One document caught Emma's attention. A typed letter on Whitmore Mining letterhead, dated November 1974. Addressed to the senator, promising campaign contributions in exchange for blocking EPA investigations, and Victoria had written across the top in red ink, "Senator Coleman, Chairman of Interior Committee, received $500,000, blocked investigation." Emma sat back, understanding the full scope. This wasn't just stock fraud. This was proof of a vast criminal conspiracy that had operated at the highest levels of business and government, that had stolen from thousands of families and corrupted public officials. She thought of Marcus sitting outside, of his desperation, and she understood he wasn't just protecting family wealth, he was protecting family freedom, because if this evidence saw light, the Whitmore family would face criminal charges that could imprison them for life. There was one more item at the bottom, a sealed envelope with Emma's name written in Victoria's handwriting, though that was impossible because Victoria had died before Emma was born, yet there it was. To Emma Marsh, daughter of my daughter, and the letter inside began, "If you are reading this, then you are the one I have been waiting for." Emma set Victoria's letter aside and reached for the last document in the safe, a single sheet in a protective sleeve. And when she unfolded it, she found an official appraisal on letterhead from Garibaldi & Sons, Discrete Valuation Services, Geneva, Switzerland. Dated the 18th of November 1974. Less than a month before Victoria's disappearance. The document was clinically precise. Bearer bonds, U.S. Treasury, various denominations, total face value, $87 million. Gold certificates. Federal Reserve, total declared value, $43 million. Stock certificates, various mining companies, assessed as fraudulent instruments. No market value but potentially significant legal value as evidence. Rough diamonds, various carats, estimated total value, $71 million. And at the bottom in bold typescript, total portfolio value, $201 million USD as of November 1974. Emma stared at the number, her mind refusing to process it, because $200 million in 1974 money was an incomprehensible fortune, and inflation had increased values roughly 5 times since then, which meant she was looking at potentially $1 billion in modern terms, possibly more. She looked at Lily curled beside her, at her daughter's worn coat with its broken zipper, at shoes that were too small, and she thought about the cramped apartment, the double shifts at the diner, the crushing weight of poverty that had defined their lives, and here was enough wealth to solve every problem they'd ever had for generations. But clipped to the appraisal was another note in Victoria's handwriting, explaining the impossible situation. "I know what this wealth represents. I know it is stolen from innocent people. And my first instinct was to go to the authorities, but Thomas has connections that reach into the highest levels of government, judges and prosecutors on his payroll, and if I go public he will kill me. He has made that clear, and worse, he will take Catherine from me, will paint me as unstable, will have me committed to an institution where I will be silenced permanently. I have consulted with lawyers who all told me the same thing. A woman accusing her wealthy husband has no chance of being believed, and even if believed, the legal process will take years during which Thomas will have opportunity to destroy me." The note continued. "So I have hidden the evidence where Thomas will never find it, in a place that requires innocence to access, qualities he utterly lacks, and I have left instructions that this estate must pass only through the female line, only to descendants who will understand what it means to be cast out. I know Thomas will kill me. I have accepted this, but I have ensured that the estate will eventually pass to the one who needs it most, to the daughter of my daughter, the one they will cast out as they cast me out." The note concluded, "To you, my unknown descendant, I leave this choice. Take the money and run. Use it to build a safe life. No one would blame you, or use the evidence to finish what I could not. Knowing this will put you in danger, will make you a target for people who have spent 50 years protecting these secrets. I cannot tell you which path to take because I am dead and you are alive, but whatever you decide, know that you are loved by a ghost who has been waiting 50 years for you to arrive." Emma sat in the cold attic with the contents of the safe spread before her, and as she stared at Victoria's handwriting and the dates on the documents, the full architecture of the conspiracy that had shaped her entire life began to reveal itself with terrible clarity. Her grandmother, Catherine, had been only 7 when Victoria disappeared, young enough that her memories would have been malleable, easy for Thomas to reshape, and Emma realized Catherine must have been removed from the mansion immediately, taken to live with Thomas's brother, raised in a household that taught her to believe her mother had been unstable, that Victoria had abandoned her family. But Catherine had known the numbers, had written them in chalk in the attic, and she had never told anyone because some deep buried loyalty to the mother she barely remembered had kept that secret safe for her entire life. Emma thought of her own mother, Margaret, Catherine's daughter, who had been raised in the Whitmore family orbit but always at its edges, accepted but never quite belonging. And now Emma understood that Margaret's cold rejection when Emma had gotten pregnant hadn't been about moral judgment. It had been about fear. The Whitmore family had been searching for Victoria's evidence for 50 years, had probably monitored Catherine's life, waiting for any sign she knew where her mother had hidden the proof of Thomas's crimes. And when Catherine died without revealing the secret, attention would have shifted to Margaret. When Emma had gotten pregnant and been cast out, Margaret hadn't been punishing her for moral failure. She had been severing the connection, creating distance, ensuring that if Emma ever somehow inherited the estate, the Whitmore family couldn't accuse Margaret of having been involved. Emma's banishment hadn't been about her pregnancy at all. It had been about positioning, about Margaret protecting herself from the consequences of Victoria's revenge reaching across generations. The cruelty took Emma's breath away. She had spent 7 years believing she'd been rejected for her choices, carrying guilt and shame, when in reality she had been sacrificed, deliberately cast out so she could serve as a firewall between the Whitmore family and their darkest secrets. Margaret had known Emma might inherit the estate, had probably been informed when Sterling's firm began tracking down Victoria's descendants, and she had made her choice. Better to lose her daughter than risk being connected to whatever Emma might find. Emma thought back to the last conversation with her mother, 7 years ago when she'd shown up pregnant and desperate, and Margaret had stood in the doorway and said with cold finality, "You've made your choices, now you have to live with them. Don't come back here, don't contact me or anyone in this family." At the time Emma had thought it was judgment, but now she understood it had been strategy. Margaret creating a documented break she could point to later, proof she had severed all ties years before the inheritance. The realization made Emma sick because it meant her mother had chosen the Whitmore family over her own daughter. The pattern became clearer. The estate had been trapped by Victoria's instructions for 50 years, and the Whitmore family had assumed they would find the evidence during that time, but they had failed. And when the 50-year mark arrived and Sterling was legally obligated to execute Victoria's will, the family must have panicked. Emma had just finished processing the full scope of her family's betrayal when she heard it, the sharp crack of breaking glass from somewhere on the ground floor. And she knew Marcus had decided waiting was no longer an option. She grabbed Lily, shaking her daughter awake, and half carried her down the attic stairs as more sounds came from below, the rattle of a doorknob being tested, the creak of wood under pressure, the low murmur of voices conferring in the darkness. They were probing the mansion's defenses, and Emma realized she had minutes before they found a way inside. "Mama, what's happening?" Lily whispered, and Emma pressed a finger to her lips, leading her to Victoria's bedroom, the room that felt safest. She sat Lily on the bed and pulled out her cell phone, finding exactly what she expected. No signal, only emergency calls only, which meant 911 might connect. She dialed, her hands shaking, and after an eternity of ringing, a woman's voice answered, 911, what is your emergency? My name is Emma Marsh. I'm at the Whitmore estate off County Road 47. There are men trying to break into the house. I'm trapped with my 7-year-old daughter. We need help immediately, the dispatcher typed, then asked, Ma'am, I'm showing your location as approximately 40 miles northwest of town. Is that correct? Emma confirmed it was, her heart sinking. Ma'am, I need you to stay calm, but County Road 47 is currently impassable. We've had multiple avalanches. The earliest we can get a unit to your location is probably 48 hours, possibly longer. The words were like a physical blow. But there are men breaking in right now. They're going to hurt us. Ma'am, is there a safe room in the structure, somewhere you can barricade yourself? Emma said yes, and the dispatcher told her to do that now and stay on the line, but Emma ended the call, knowing she and Lily were on their own. She could hear the intruders more clearly now, could track their progress. First the kitchen where someone was forcing a window, then voices calling to each other coordinating their entry. She grabbed Lily's hand and ran for the grand staircase, then stopped, a thought occurring. Thomas's study, where a man like him would have kept tools of power. She rushed to the study off the main hallway, her eyes scanning until she found it. Mounted above the fireplace in a glass case was an old hunting rifle, a lever-action Winchester. Emma smashed the glass with the poker and grabbed the rifle, checking its chamber and finding it empty. No ammunition anywhere, but she took it anyway because Marcus didn't know it was unloaded. She heard footsteps inside the house now, coming from the kitchen, and she ran back to the staircase, pulling Lily up to the second floor. She chose Victoria's bedroom for its single door and heavy furniture, shoving the massive armoire across the door, then adding the vanity and both chairs, creating a barricade. Lily huddled on the bed, and Emma went to her, whispering, "It's going to be okay. Mama won't let anyone hurt you." She positioned herself where she could see the door, holding the unloaded Winchester, and waited. The footsteps climbed the stairs, systematic and thorough, and then Marcus's voice called out, calm and reasonable, "Emma Marsh, I know you're up here. Just open the door and we can talk about this like rational adults. I'm not here to hurt you." The night passed in tense standoff, Marcus eventually retreating after Emma threatened to shoot, the bluff working because he couldn't be certain she wasn't armed. Emma and Lily huddled in Victoria's bed, neither sleeping, listening to sounds of men ransacking rooms below, searching for the safe or for weaknesses. When dawn finally came, gray and cold, the activity ceased and eerie silence descended. Emma risked moving the barricade to peer into the hallway, finding it empty, the house seeming abandoned except for evidence of the night's intrusion. Overturned furniture, dumped drawers. Systematic destruction. Through a window she saw the black SUV still parked in the drive, covered in snow but clearly occupied. Around mid-morning, a sound cut through the quiet. Electronic feedback. Then Marcus's voice amplified by a bullhorn. "Emma, I know you can hear me, and I want to apologize for last night. Things got out of hand, but this situation doesn't have to be adversarial. We can find a solution that benefits everyone." Emma moved to the window, staying back from the glass. Watching as Marcus stood in the snow near his vehicle, the bullhorn raised. "I'm prepared to make you a generous offer, $50,000 in cash, which I have with me right now. In exchange for any documents you found in the attic and your signature relinquishing all claim to the estate, you walk away with enough money to start over. It's a fair deal." Emma said nothing, and after a moment Marcus lowered the bullhorn, conferred with one of his men, then raised it again, his tone shifting. "I need an answer today, because the storm is supposed to break tonight, and once the road's clear this becomes much more complicated, much more public, and I don't think you want police and lawyers and media attention. I don't think you want your daughter's face on the news." The implication was clear. Marcus would control the narrative, would paint her as unstable. Then he revealed his true weapon. "I know a lot about you, Emma. I know you live at 847 Columbine Street, apartment 3B. I know you work at Murphy's Diner. I know Lily attends Jefferson Elementary, and her teacher is Mrs. Rodriguez. I know you have exactly $237 in your checking account, and you're 3 weeks behind on your electric bill." The specificity made Emma's blood run cold because it meant Marcus had been watching them, building a file. "I also know that you're a good mother, and I respect that, which is why I want to help you. But if you refuse my offer, if you insist on being stubborn, then you need to understand what happens next. I will make your life hell. I will file complaints with Child Protective Services alleging you brought your daughter into a dangerous situation, that you're mentally unstable, and I have resources to make those complaints stick. I have doctors and lawyers who will drag you through family court until you're bankrupt, and at the end, Lily will be in foster care while you spend years fighting to get her back." Emma felt tears streaming, not from fear but rage, because Marcus was threatening the one thing that mattered. She moved to the window and threw it open, calling down, "I know what you did, Marcus. I know Thomas murdered Victoria, and I have proof that will destroy every member of the Whitmore family. And if you think threatening my daughter will make me hand that over, you're deluded." Emma stood at the window long after Marcus returned to his vehicle, her mind racing through scenarios and finding no good options, when Lily's small voice broke through her paralysis. "Mama, the lady is calling me again. She wants to show us something." Emma turned to find her daughter standing beside Victoria's bed, her head tilted as if listening to a voice only she could hear. "Where, sweetheart? Where does she want you to go?" Emma asked, and Lily walked with certainty to the wall of bookshelves, reaching up to touch a leather-bound volume that was slightly recessed, pushed back into the shelf. Emma examined the shelf closely, finding what Lily had discovered. The book wasn't a book at all but a lever, and when Emma pressed it firmly she heard a click, followed by soft grinding as a section of bookshelf swung slowly inward on hidden hinges, revealing a narrow doorway into darkness. Emma grabbed the oil lamp and stepped through with Lily close behind. Finding a small room painted faded yellow, its walls covered in children's drawings, crayon pictures of houses and flowers, stick figure families with a mother and little girl holding hands, drawings of the mansion with hearts decorating its walls, and in the corner, repeated careful printing. Catherine Whitmore, age 6, Catherine Whitmore, age 7. Tracking the years Victoria and her daughter had spent together. On a small shelf sat toys that had survived decades. A porcelain doll, a wooden horse, a tea set, and most heartbreaking, a photograph in a silver frame showing Victoria and a little girl who could only be Catherine, both laughing, sitting on the mansion's front steps in summer sunlight, their faces radiant with happiness. Emma picked up the photograph, seeing in Catherine's face the ghost of her own mother's features, the genetic thread connecting 3 generations of women broken by the same family. On the table beneath the shelf was a letter, sealed in an envelope with Victoria's inscription, to Catherine's daughter's daughter, Emma Marsh. Open only when you have seen what I have hidden. Emma broke the seal and unfolded the pages, Victoria's final message beginning. My dear Emma, if you are reading this, then my plan has worked. Then you have found the safe and perhaps you are wondering what you should do, whether the fortune is a gift or a curse. I cannot answer these questions because I am dead and you are alive. But I can tell you what I have learned. Catherine was raised to believe I was a madwoman who abandoned her, told I ran away or killed myself, and she grew up believing these lies. Margaret was raised on the edges of the Whitmore family, and when her daughter made the mistake of being human, of becoming pregnant without marriage, Margaret did what had been done to her and to me. She cast you out. The letter continued for several pages, explaining how Victoria had watched from beyond death as Emma struggled, and concluded, the choice is yours. Take the money and burn the evidence, or use the evidence knowing it will put you in danger. But know this, they will never stop hunting for what I have hidden. We'll never let you live in peace. Victoria's signature was followed by a postscript. I have one more gift, hidden where innocence kept its treasures. Let the child show you. Emma had been searching the hidden room for hours, trying to determine what Victoria's brass key might unlock, finding nothing, and she'd concluded it must open something elsewhere in the mansion. They had returned to Victoria's bedroom as darkness fell, barricading themselves in once again, and Emma had been watching the SUV through the window when Lily suddenly sat up and said, Mama, I smell something burning. Emma's first instinct was to dismiss it, but then she smelled it too. Not clean wood smoke, but something acrid and chemical, old varnish and fabric catching fire. She rushed to the door, pressing her hand against it to feel for heat, finding it cool, then cracking it open to peer into the hallway. What she saw made her heart stop. Orange light flickering at the far end of the corridor from the east wing, flames licking around a doorframe, the fire establishing itself in the old structure. And she understood Marcus had decided if he couldn't have the mansion, no one would. Lily, get up, we have to go now. Emma screamed, grabbing her daughter, her mind racing through options and finding them all terrible. She threw open the door, not caring about Marcus anymore because the fire was more immediate, and she ran with Lily toward the main stairs, praying they were still clear. The heat hit her as they reached the landing, the great room below filling with smoke, and she saw the front entrance was blocked, flames consuming curtains and spreading across the ceiling. She pivoted, pulling Lily toward the servants' stairs, then remembered the safe, Victoria's legacy burning, and she made a decision that might cost their lives but that she had to make. This way, she shouted, dragging Lily toward the attic stairs instead of toward escape, and Lily screamed, Mama, no, the fire. But Emma didn't stop, because if the evidence burned, then Victoria's plan would be for nothing. They burst into the attic, smoke already seeping through floorboards, and Emma ran to the safe, grabbing her backpack and frantically stuffing documents inside. Fraud evidence, ledgers, photographs. Everything proving Thomas's crimes, her hands shaking. The diamonds she grabbed by the handful, canvas bags going into the backpack along with bearer bonds and gold certificates, and she knew she couldn't take everything, but she took what would be enough. She grabbed Lily's hand and ran back toward the stairs. The corridor was thick with smoke, visibility down to feet, and Emma pulled her shirt over her nose and Lily's, stumbling through the gray fog. But in the smoke and panic she became disoriented, found herself at a dead end, realized she'd gone the wrong direction, that they were trapped. Lily was coughing, her small body racked with spasms, and Emma felt her own lungs burning, knew they had minutes before the smoke overwhelmed them. She dropped to her knees, pulling Lily down, remembering smoke rises and air near the floor is clearer, and she began to crawl, one hand on the wall, trying to find a different route. When through the roar she heard Lily's voice. "Mama, the music box room. The lady says go to the music box room." Emma didn't question it, didn't waste time asking how Lily knew or what Victoria's ghost had told her. She just changed direction, crawling toward where she remembered the child's bedroom had been, the room where Lily had found the music box that first day, and as they moved the smoke seemed to thin slightly, as if the fire hadn't reached this section yet, and she found the door, kicked it open, and pulled Lily inside, slamming it behind them and gasping for air. The room was clearer, the smoke here just a haze rather than the suffocating blanket it had been in the hallway, but Emma knew it was only a matter of time before the fire reached them, before this room became their tomb. And she looked around desperately for a window they could break, for any possible escape, and saw nothing but solid walls and antique furniture that mocked her with their uselessness. The heat was intensifying. She could feel it radiating through the walls, could hear the roar of flames getting closer, the ancient timbers of the mansion groaning and cracking as the fire consumed them from within. And she wanted to scream with frustration because they had come so far, had survived so much, only to die trapped in a child's bedroom, while Marcus and his men watched safely from outside. "The wall, Mama, push the wall," Lily was saying, tugging frantically on Emma's arm and pointing to the wainscoting beneath the window, to a section of wall decorated with carved wooden roses identical to the ones in Victoria's bedroom. And Emma didn't understand until Lily pressed her small hand against one of the roses, the same gesture she'd used before, and this time when she pushed, a section of the wall swung inward with a soft click that was barely audible over the roar of the fire, revealing a narrow opening and a set of stone stairs descending into absolute darkness. Emma stared at the opening for a split second, her mind processing what she was seeing. This was Victoria's final gift, the escape route she'd mentioned in her letter. A hidden passage that would lead them out of the burning mansion and away from Marcus's trap, built by a woman who had known she might someday need to flee, and who had planned for every contingency, even her own death. Behind them, Emma heard a tremendous crash as something heavy collapsed in the hallway, and a wave of heat so intense it felt like a physical blow rolled into the room, and she knew they had seconds, maybe less, before the fire breached the door and consumed them. She grabbed Lily, pulled her through the opening, and together they plunged down the stone stairs into the darkness, Emma feeling blindly with one hand on the cold wall to guide them while her other arm wrapped protectively around her daughter. The passage was narrow, barely wide enough for an adult, and the stairs were steep and uneven, worn smooth by time and by feet that had used them long ago, perhaps during Prohibition when the mansion had been built, perhaps by bootleggers or by family members hiding contraband, or perhaps by Victoria herself, planning her escape that had never come. Behind them, Emma heard a deafening roar as the ceiling of the music box room collapsed, flames rushing into the space they had just vacated, and she felt a blast of superheated air come down the stairwell, singeing her hair and making Lily scream, and she ran faster, stumbling down the stairs in the pitch black, one hand trailing the wall, the other clutching her daughter, the backpack with Victoria's evidence bouncing painfully against her spine. The stairs seemed to go on forever, descending deep into the earth, far below the mansion's foundation, and the air grew cooler and damper, the smell of smoke replaced by the scent of wet stone and earth. And Emma realized they were in a tunnel, a passage carved through the bedrock itself, an engineering feat that must have cost a fortune and taken years to build. The darkness was absolute, so complete that Emma couldn't see her own hand in front of her face, and she had to move by feel alone, one hand on the rough stone wall, shuffling forward carefully because she had no idea what lay ahead, whether the tunnel was stable or whether it had collapsed somewhere, blocking their escape and turning their salvation into another tomb. Lily was crying softly, her small body shaking with fear and exhaustion and the after effects of smoke inhalation, and Emma wanted to comfort her, wanted to tell her everything would be okay. But she didn't have breath to spare for words, could only focus on putting one foot in front of the other, on moving forward through the suffocating darkness. The tunnel continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the stone walls pressing in from both sides, the ceiling low enough that Emma had to hunch over, and she felt the weight of the mountain above them, thousands of tons of rock and earth that could crush them in an instant if the tunnel collapsed, and she pushed the thought away and kept moving. Then finally she saw it, A faint gray light ahead, barely visible but there, and she felt a surge of hope so powerful it was almost painful, and she stumbled forward faster, pulling Lily along. And the light grew brighter as they approached, and Emma realized it was coming from above, from a vertical shaft that rose up through the rock. The vertical shaft had iron rungs set into the stone, rusted and ancient but still solid, and Emma climbed first, testing each rung before putting her weight on it, then helped Lily up behind her, their hands slippery with sweat despite the cold, and when they reached the top they found themselves in a larger space, some kind of natural cavern, and Emma pulled out her phone, using its dying battery to activate the flashlight, the weak beam revealing a maze of passages branching off in multiple directions. The phone screen showed 5% battery remaining, and Emma knew they had minutes at best before the light died, before they would be trapped in absolute darkness in a cave system with no idea which direction led to safety and which led deeper into the mountain to dead ends and starvation. She chose the passage that seemed to have the slightest current of air, reasoning that moving air meant a connection to the outside world, and they began walking. Lily's hand gripped tightly in hers, the child's crying now continuous, a soft, desperate sound that broke Emma's heart. The passage was narrow and uneven, the walls pressing close on both sides, and Emma had to duck constantly to avoid hitting her head on low-hanging rock, the ceiling sometimes dropping so low they had to crawl on hands and knees through spaces that seemed designed to trap them, to squeeze the life from their lungs. Her phone flashlight flickered, the battery warning changing to 3%, then 2%, and Emma knew they had seconds left, and she played the beam frantically across the walls, looking for any sign, any indication of which way to go, and saw nothing but endless stone, the mountain's indifferent face offering no comfort, no guidance. "Mama, I'm scared. I can't breathe." Lily sobbed, her small body trembling, and Emma wanted to tell her it would be okay, but the words wouldn't come because she wasn't sure it would be okay, wasn't sure they would survive this. And the thought of dying here in the dark with her daughter, of their bodies never being found, of Marcus winning after everything, filled her with a rage so intense it burned away the fear. The phone light died with a final flicker, plunging them into a darkness so complete it seemed to have physical weight, pressing down on them from all sides, and Emma heard Lily scream, felt her daughter's hands clutching at her desperately, and she pulled the girl close, holding her tight, both of them sitting on the cold stone floor of the cave because there was no point in moving blindly. No point in stumbling forward into unknown darkness that might lead to a cliff edge or a dead end. Emma's mind raced, trying to remember anything useful from survival training she'd had years ago, and she thought about sound, about how caves could carry echoes, and she called out, her voice hoarse, "Hello, is anyone there?" and listened as the sound bounced off the walls, distorted and multiplied, coming back to her from multiple directions and telling her nothing. They sat in the darkness for what might have been hours, time losing all meaning when you couldn't see, couldn't measure the passage of moments by anything except the beating of your own heart and the shallow breathing of your terrified child. And Emma felt despair creeping in, the cold seeping into her bones. And she thought of all the ways they might die here, from cold, from dehydration, from simply giving up and letting the darkness take them. Then Lily stirred against her and whispered, "Mama, I see something, a little light, over there." And Emma looked where her daughter was pointing, though she could see nothing. But she trusted Lily, trusted that a child's eyes might see what adult eyes could not, and she stood, pulling her daughter up, and they began to walk, following Lily's guidance through the absolute blackness. They walked for what felt like an eternity through the absolute darkness, Lily murmuring directions that Emma couldn't verify but followed anyway because she had no other choice. And gradually, Emma began to sense something changing. The air was moving more strongly, a definite current that carried with it the faint smell of pine and snow, and the oppressive weight of the mountain seemed to be lifting. Then she saw it too, what Lily had seen first, a pinpoint of gray light ahead, so faint it might have been imagination, but it grew brighter as they stumbled toward it. And suddenly they were standing at the mouth of the cave, looking out at a snow-covered mountainside far below where the mansion had stood. The cold hit them like a physical blow after the relative warmth of the cave, and Emma looked up to see the sky above them glowing orange, smoke billowing from somewhere higher on the mountain where Whitmore Manor was burning itself to ash. They were alive, they had escaped, but they were also freezing, soaked with sweat that was now turning to ice, and Emma knew they had maybe an hour before hypothermia took them. She scanned the landscape desperately, seeing nothing but snow and trees, and then Lily tugged on her hand and pointed downslope to where a thin column of smoke rose from among the pines, barely visible in the darkness. Emma half carried, half dragged her daughter through the deep snow, fighting her way toward that smoke, praying it represented salvation and not another threat. And after 20 minutes of exhausting struggle, they broke through a line of trees and found themselves looking at a small log cabin. Warm light glowing in its windows, smoke curling from a stone chimney. Emma stumbled to the door and pounded on it with numb fists. And after a moment it opened to reveal an elderly man, perhaps 70, with a weathered face and kind eyes that widened in shock at the sight of a woman and child, smoke-blackened and shivering, standing on his doorstep. "Please," Emma gasped. "We need help. The mansion is burning, my daughter." The man didn't hesitate, didn't ask questions, just stepped aside and ushered them in. His movements surprisingly quick for his age. "I'm Ben. I'm the caretaker here. Get by the stove, both of you, quickly now." The cabin's interior was simple but warm, dominated by a wood stove that radiated blessed heat, and Ben moved efficiently, wrapping them in blankets, pressing mugs of hot tea into their hands, his weathered face creased with concern. When they had stopped shaking enough to speak, Ben sat across from them and said quietly, "You're Emma, aren't you, Victoria's descendant? I've been waiting for you." Emma stared at him, and he explained, "I've maintained these grounds for 40 years, since before Victoria disappeared. I was one of the few people who believed she didn't just run away, who knew Thomas was capable of murder." His voice was gentle but firm. "Victoria came to me the night before she vanished, terrified, carrying nothing but a small bag, and she told me she'd hidden evidence where only someone pure of heart could find it. And she asked me to watch over the estate and help her descendant when she finally came." He looked at Emma with ancient, knowing eyes. "She said you'd be cast out like she was. Said you'd need a friend, and she was right, wasn't she? The family threw you away just like they did to her, and now you've found what she left, and Marcus is trying to take it." Ben rose and added another log to the stove, the firelight casting shadows across his weathered face, and when he sat down his eyes held pain carried for half a century. It was the 14th of December 1974. Near midnight, when Victoria knocked on this door. I was 25 then, hired by Thomas to maintain the grounds. And she trusted me because I'd never treated her like she was crazy when she tried to tell people what Thomas was doing. He paused, his gnarled hands wrapped around his mug. She came that night wearing just a thin coat, shaking from cold and fear, with a small canvas bag, and she told me Thomas knew she'd been gathering evidence, that he was going to kill her, probably the next day, as soon as he'd arranged for Catherine to be away. Emma felt Lily press closer, listening intently. Victoria said she'd spent 3 months creating a treasure hunt, the kind she used to play with Catherine, hiding the evidence in layers, one clue leading to another, designed so only someone innocent could follow the path. Only someone who trusted in goodness rather than greed, because greed makes you blind to certain clues. Ben's voice grew softer. She told me the final hiding place was protected by what she called the lock of innocence, something requiring a pure heart to open, and even if Thomas found the safe, he'd never access it. That the combination would forever elude him because it required seeing the world through a child's eyes, and Thomas had never been a child, had been born already corrupt. He walked to a wooden chest, pulling out a faded photograph showing Victoria with a younger Ben beside this cabin, both smiling, and Emma could see the friendship that had transcended employer and employee boundaries. She asked me to watch over the estate after she was gone, to make sure it didn't fall to complete ruin, and to help her descendant when she arrived. She was specific it would be a woman, the daughter of her daughter, someone the family had cast out, and she said I'd know you because you'd carry the same look she had, the look of someone broken by the world but refusing to stay broken. Ben's eyes filled with tears. The next day, December 15, I saw Thomas leave the estate in the early afternoon. And I had a terrible certainty, so I went to check on Victoria, but the doors were locked, and she didn't answer. And by the time I got the sheriff involved 2 days later, Thomas had already spread his story that she'd run off, had produced a note supposedly in her handwriting, and the sheriff, who was on Thomas's payroll, accepted it without question. His voice hardened with old anger. I knew she was dead, knew he'd killed her somewhere on this estate, probably buried her where she'd never be found. And I've spent 40 years maintaining these grounds, walking every inch, looking for any sign of where he put her, any disturbance in the earth. But the estate is vast, hundreds of acres. And Thomas was clever, and I never found her. Emma felt a chill. You think her body is still here? Ben nodded slowly. I'm certain of it. Thomas wouldn't have risked moving her off the estate. Too many chances to be seen. No, he killed her in the mansion and buried her somewhere close. Somewhere he could keep an eye on, and she's been here all these years, waiting for justice. Ben disappeared into a back room and returned carrying a bulky satellite phone, the kind used by people who lived so far from civilization that normal cell towers couldn't reach them. This works anywhere, anytime, as long as you can see the sky, he said, handing it to Emma. Who do you need to call? Emma thought of Harold Sterling, of the local police who were probably on the Whitmore payroll like the sheriff had been 50 years ago, and she realized she needed to go higher. Needed someone who couldn't be bought or intimidated. A federal prosecutor, someone in Denver, someone who handles major fraud cases. Ben nodded and pulled out an old laptop, connecting it to the satellite system, and after a few minutes of searching, he found what they needed. Sarah Chen, Assistant U.S. Attorney for the District of Colorado, head of the Financial Crimes Division. Emma dialed the emergency number listed on the Justice Department website, her hands shaking, and after being transferred twice, she heard a woman's voice, crisp and professional even at this late hour. This is Sarah Chen, Miss Chen. My name is Emma Marsh. I'm calling about evidence in a 50-year-old fraud case, the Whitmore mining fraud from the 1970 seconds. I have original documents proving, Miss Marsh. Stop, Chen interrupted, her tone suddenly sharp with interest. Where are you calling from, and how did you obtain these documents? Emma explained as concisely as she could. The inheritance, the safe, Victoria's murder, Marcus's threats, the fire, everything tumbling out in a rush. And Chen listened without interrupting, then said, I need you to send me photographs of these documents right now. Use the email address I'm about to give you, and then I need you to stay exactly where you are, and do not engage with anyone from the Whitmore family. Using Ben's laptop, Emma photographed page after page of Victoria's evidence, the bearer bonds, the fraud ledgers, the bribery records, Thomas's handwritten notes. All of it uploaded to Chen's secure server, and she could hear the prosecutor's sharp intake of breath as the images came through. My God, Chen whispered, this is comprehensive. This is everything we'd need to reopen the case. Do you understand what you have here, Miss Marsh? The Whitmore mining fraud destroyed thousands of families, ruined entire communities, and the statute of limitations never ran because we could never prove the fraud existed. But with this documentation we can go after the estate, can recover funds for victims, can finally give people justice after 50 years. Chen's voice grew harder, more determined. I'm dispatching FBI agents and state police to your location immediately. I'm also arranging for helicopter transport as soon as weather permits. You and your daughter are now under federal protection, and I need you to preserve those original documents at all costs. They're evidence in what will be one of the largest fraud prosecutions in Colorado history. Emma felt tears of relief streaming down her face. Marcus Whitmore is still out there. He thinks I'm dead in the fire, but when he realizes, let me worry about Marcus Whitmore, Chen said. You just stay safe until my people get there. Dawn was just breaking when Ben, who had been watching through the window, suddenly tensed and reached for an old hunting rifle mounted above the door. They found us, he said quietly, and Emma looked out to see the black SUV grinding through the snow toward the cabin, Marcus and his 2 men visible through the windshield. The vehicle stopped 20 yards away, and the 3 men climbed out, and Emma saw with a sinking feeling that they were all armed, pistols visible at their sides, their faces hard with determination and desperation. Emma Marsh. Marcus called out, his voice no longer cultured and controlled but raw with fury. I know you're in there. I saw the smoke from the chimney. Now you're going to come out and give me what you stole from my family, or I'm going to come in and take it. Ben moved to stand in front of Emma and Lily, raising his rifle to port arms, not aiming but making clear he was prepared to use it. This is private property, Marcus, and you're trespassing. I suggest you leave before the authorities arrive. Marcus laughed, a sound without humor. The authorities? The roads are still closed. Ben, no one is coming, and you're an old man with an old rifle facing 3 armed men, so let's not pretend you can stop us. Just send Emma out with the documents and we'll all walk away from this. Emma stepped forward, positioning herself where Marcus could see her through the window but staying behind Ben's protective stance. I've already contacted the FBI, Marcus. I've sent them copies of everything Victoria left. They know about the fraud, about the bribes, about all of it. And they're coming for you. She saw Marcus's face change, saw the color drain from his cheeks, and he took a stumbling step backward as if she'd physically struck him. You couldn't have. There's no phone service, no way to. Satellite phone, Emma said. I sent everything to Sarah Chen at the U.S. Attorney's office 2 hours ago. She's dispatching federal agents right now. So you have a choice, Marcus. You can leave and maybe get a few hours head start before they arrest you. Or you can stay here and add assault and attempted murder to your charges. Marcus stood frozen for a long moment, then his face twisted with rage and something else, something that looked almost like tears. You don't understand what you've done. That money has supported my family for 3 generations, my children's trust funds, my cousin's businesses, my mother's medical care. All of it comes from the investments Thomas made. And if the fraud is exposed, they'll seize everything. They'll take our homes, our accounts. They'll leave us with nothing. Dozens of Whitmores will lose everything they have. And for what? To give money to people who died 50 years ago? To satisfy some dead woman's revenge? His voice broke. The bearer bonds and diamonds are all that's left, Marcus. The real liquid wealth. The rest is already spent or tied up in assets that can't be easily liquidated. And if I don't get those bonds, if I can't hide them offshore before the feds freeze our accounts, then my family is destroyed. Do you understand? I'm not fighting for greed. I'm fighting for survival. Dawn was breaking when Ben, watching through the window, suddenly tensed and reached for an old hunting rifle above the door. They found us, he said quietly, and Emma saw the black SUV grinding through snow toward the cabin, Marcus and his 2 men visible through the windshield. The vehicle stopped 20 yards away, and the 3 men climbed out, all armed, pistols visible at their sides, faces hard with desperation. Emma Marsh, Marcus called out, his voice raw with fury. I know you're in there. Now you're going to come out and give me what you stole. Or I'm coming in to take it. Ben moved in front of Emma and Lily, raising his rifle, not aiming but making clear he was prepared to use it. This is private property, Marcus. You're trespassing. I suggest you leave before authorities arrive. Marcus laughed without humor. The authorities, the roads are still closed. No one is coming, and you're an old man facing 3 armed men, so let's not pretend you can stop us. Emma stepped forward, visible through the window but staying behind Ben. I've already contacted the FBI, Marcus. I've sent them copies of everything Victoria left. They know about the fraud, the bribes, all of it. And they're coming for you. Marcus's face changed, color draining from his cheeks, and he stumbled backward as if struck. You couldn't have. There's no phone service. Satellite phone, Emma said. I sent everything to Sarah Chen at the U.S. Attorney's office 2 hours ago. She's dispatching federal agents right now, so you can leave and maybe get a head start. Or stay and add assault to your charges. Marcus stood frozen, then his face twisted with rage and something like tears. You don't understand what you've done. That money has supported my family for 3 generations. My children's trust funds, my cousin's businesses, my mother's medical care. All of it comes from Thomas's investments. And if the fraud is exposed, they'll seize everything. They'll take our homes, our accounts. Dozens of Whitmores will lose everything. And for what? To give money to people who died 50 years ago. His voice broke. The bearer bonds and diamonds are all that's left, the real liquid wealth. Everything else is spent or tied up in assets that can't be liquidated. And if I don't get those bonds, if I can't hide them offshore before the feds freeze our accounts, my family is destroyed. I'm not fighting for greed. I'm fighting for survival. So give me those documents and the bonds, Emma, or I swear to God I'll kill all 3 of you right here. Marcus raised his pistol, aiming directly at Emma through the window, his hand shaking, and Ben brought his rifle up, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Then a sound cut through the morning air, a distant rhythmic thump growing rapidly louder, the unmistakable percussion of helicopter rotors. Marcus's head snapped upward, his face transforming from rage to horror, and Emma saw 2 helicopters cresting the ridge, massive black machines with FBI markings, and behind them, grinding up the newly cleared road, came state police vehicles, their lights flashing against the white landscape. The helicopters descended, their downdraft creating a blizzard of snow, and agents in tactical gear rappelled from open doors, at least a dozen of them, moving with military precision to surround the cabin. "Federal agents, drop your weapons, hands in the air." The amplified voice boomed, and Marcus's two men immediately complied, their pistols falling into snow, hands shooting up, but Marcus stood frozen, gun still in hand. "It's over, Marcus." Emma called through the window, "Drop the gun." For a long moment she thought he might not, but then his arm went slack and the pistol tumbled from his fingers, and he raised his hands slowly, his shoulders slumping, 50 years of family secrets finally catching up with him. Agents moved in quickly, handcuffing all three men, and Emma watched as Marcus was led toward a police vehicle, and just before he was pushed into the back seat he looked back, his eyes finding hers, and she saw not the arrogant executor but a broken man who had gambled everything and lost. The cabin door opened and a woman in a dark suit stepped through, showing credentials to Ben before turning to Emma. "Miss Marsh, I'm Sarah Chen. We spoke on the phone." She was perhaps 40, with sharp, intelligent eyes and absolute competence. "You and your daughter are safe now. I have medics standing by. And I need to personally thank you for what you've done. The evidence you've preserved represents one of the most significant recoveries in financial fraud history." Chen knelt at Lily's eye level. "You were very brave, sweetheart. Your great-great-aunt Victoria would be proud of you." Emma felt her legs give out, all the fear and exhaustion finally overwhelming her, and she sank to the floor, pulling Lily into her arms, both of them crying, releasing days of terror in great shuddering sobs. Chen gave them a moment, then said gently, "The evidence you sent is extraordinary. We've already begun tracing fraud victims' descendants, and while we can't restore everything, the bearer bonds and assets you recovered will establish a restitution fund. Hundreds of families will finally receive some measure of justice." She paused. "And Victoria Whitmore's story will finally be told. The truth about what happened to her, about what she sacrificed, will become part of the public record. Her silence will finally speak." 3 months later, Emma and Lily stood before a modest 2-story house in a quiet Denver neighborhood, the kind of place Emma had once thought belonged to a different world where single mothers didn't get to live. The house had a small yard, a porch with a swing, and windows that let in light. And as Emma turned the key in the lock for the first time as owner, not renter, she felt something shift in her chest. Some weight she'd carried for 7 years finally lifting. The legal process had been complex, involving probate courts and federal prosecutors and endless depositions, but Sarah Chen had guided them through it. As Victoria's sole legitimate heir through the unbroken female line, Emma had legal claim to a significant portion of recovered assets. The bearer bonds alone were worth over $60 million, and the diamonds another $15 million. After restitution to victims' families and legal fees, Emma would receive approximately $20 million, enough to never worry about money again, enough to give Lily every opportunity Emma had never had. But more important than money was justice. The evidence had opened investigations, reaching into dozens of interconnected crimes, and 17 members of the Whitmore family, including Marcus, faced criminal charges. The story had dominated Colorado news for weeks, and Victoria's name had been cleared, her courage finally recognized. Emma had used part of her inheritance to establish the Victoria Whitmore Foundation for Single Mothers, offering housing assistance, childcare support, and job training to women who, like her, had been cast out by families that should have protected them. As spring arrived and snow melted from the mountains, Emma and Lily spent their first Saturday planting flowers in the front garden, digging holes in earth that belonged to them, creating beauty that would bloom year after year. Lily, her hands dirty and face bright with joy, looked up and asked, "Mama, do you think we'll ever go back to the mountain, to see where the mansion was?" Emma paused, trowel in hand, and looked at her daughter, at this brave girl who had heard ghosts and followed them through fire and darkness, who had trusted when trust seemed impossible. "We don't need to go back, sweetheart," Emma said softly, reaching out to brush dirt from Lily's cheek. "We're finally home." That night, after Lily had fallen asleep in her new bedroom with its clean walls and soft carpet, Emma sat on the porch swing and looked up at the stars, thinking of Victoria, the great aunt she had never met but who had shaped her life more profoundly than anyone living. She thought of the woman who had spent her final days creating an elaborate treasure hunt across time, who had been murdered for trying to do the right thing, who had trusted that someday her sacrifice would matter. "Thank you," Emma whispered to the night, to the ghost she believed was still watching. "Thank you for the greatest inheritance of all, not the money, not the justice, but the freedom to finally be who we were meant to be. And somewhere, in that place between life and death where Victoria had waited for 50 years, Emma could have sworn she felt a warmth, a presence, a sense of profound peace, as if a long watch had finally ended and a restless spirit could finally rest.